Hey, everybody. Welcome into episode 143 of the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. My guest on the show today is Dr. Nick Davies. And here's what you need to know about Dr. Davies. He is an associate principal for Vancouver Public Schools and an adjunct faculty member for Pacific University. He's been a school administrator for 5 years, both at the primary and secondary levels. He has a Ph.D. in education and leadership. Dr. Davies is a National Outstanding Assistant Principal and was named the 2024 Elementary Assistant Principal of the Year for the state of Washington. He's a former high school math teacher, head track and field coach, was a two-time Coach of the Year in the state of Oregon, and has published numerous articles and presented nationwide on school leadership. Dr. Davies and I sat down recently and had a conversation about his work as an associate principal, and the interesting thing here is that Dr. Davies is an associate principal in not one, but two different elementary schools. We're going to talk about the interesting dynamic between being in multiple schools, the difference in demographics of the two schools, and how he shows up consistently as the same person, both locations, but how he's aware of and understands the dynamics in each school. Folks, this is a really great conversation. I know you're going to love it. You're going to get it all right after this. I began my leadership career, official leadership career, like with a title and everything, as a high school assistant principal. And like many assistant principals, the role that I landed had me in charge of student discipline and student attendance. Yes, this is where you can feel sorry for me. Certainly, at times, a thankless job, but also a job that gave me an opportunity to learn so much about leadership and about what really mattered as a school leader. And I think it did a lot to help prepare me for my next assistant principal role and then ultimately my principal role. And joining me on the show today, we have Nick Davies, who is an assistant principal, an elementary school assistant principal, interestingly in two buildings, not just one. So Nick is doubling up, if you will, being an assistant principal in two different buildings, and was recently named the 2024 State of Washington Elementary Assistant Principal of the Year. Nick, thank you for joining me here on the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about this conversation because I think so often one of the most overlooked roles, but also most essential roles in any school is the assistant principal. And I'm really curious to hear how you have navigated two schools as an assistant principal. Interestingly, this year, one of the schools or one of the districts that I work with, that I do leadership coaching with in New Jersey, has two elementary schools that are sharing an assistant principal, or they were. They have now figured out that just doesn't work very well and have hired an additional assistant principal. So all three of their elementary schools now have assistant principals. So I'm curious about how that landscape has worked for you. You shared a few things before we hit record, so we'll talk more as we dive in. But before we go too far, Nick, let's give you an opportunity to maybe, I guess, orient our listeners a little bit into who Nick Davies is, what has brought you to the point in your career that you are, what makes you tick. So go for it.
Yeah. Well, a few things. I think kind of down at my core, I always say my core values are family, integrity, and health. And so, I can't start talking about myself without going first to the family. So been married for a long time. We were high school sweethearts before we got married. We got 3 kids right now, 6, 3, and our daughter just turned 1. So we're very busy at home and love to be as involved as possible with my kids' lives. I coach soccer in the fall. I'll have 2 soccer teams with both of the boys. And so just a lot of fun being heavily involved there. And then kind of how I got to this point in my professional career, I started off as a math, Spanish, and PE teacher. I've yet to meet someone who that was their first teaching job at the high school level.
Interesting combination.
Yes, very, very interesting. And I actually did that at 2 different high schools, which was even more surprising. but that, heavily involved in athletics. And so I became a head track coach. And we had one of we had the biggest program in the state of Oregon, really successful. And that made me just help me get an idea of systems and how do you put things in place. And so then I, got my admin license, got a job closer to home in Vancouver, Washington, where we live. And that just, I became an athletic director, an AP, again, focusing on those systems and understanding all the dynamics that go into being, trying to be an instructional leader, take care of safety and discipline while running a very large athletic department. And during that time, I was working on my doctorate, and we had our second kid, right? So trying to be hyper focused, prioritizing things, which is still a focus of mine, especially now being in 2 elementary schools. I use a lot of those same skills now. And then you mentioned some cool recognition I've gotten this year, which is great for my work at the elementary schools. And after I earned the doctorate, I started teaching at the same university, so Pacific University. I'm an adjunct faculty. My next class starts a week from tomorrow, so that'll be fun. It's nice to be back in the classroom, which is why all of us started in these careers in the first place, and now get to be back there teaching future teachers.
Yeah, absolutely. I just recently as well moved into doing that adjunct faculty work and teach at the master's level. But my students, similar to yours, are just going to their very first teaching careers. Mine just happened to be coming from a different pathway, right? People who have earned a bachelor's in something else and are now looping back and coming into education through a different pathway. And you're absolutely correct. One of my big takeaways from this semester was, I haven't been in the classroom as a classroom teacher in a number of years. I was a principal and superintendent for 15 years, so it's been a while. But even in a remote world, connection matters, relationships matter, and it was really it was great to make that connection again. So let's go right at the split building, which clearly the more you talk about your story, the more you were just perfect for this. So one, just doing Spanish, PE, and what was the third one? History? Math. There you go. See, it's that much of a unicorn. I couldn't even remember what it was. So doing that at multiple schools, and now being an assistant principal in multiple schools. How do I even want to ask this question? There takes us a special mindset to be able to exist in 2 different schools. And you shared and share as much as you'd like or as little, about the 2 schools. But before we hit record, the demographics are considerably different between your 2 elementary schools. So talk a little bit about just, I guess, the dichotomy of those 2 jobs.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Talking about the demographics of the school is a great place to start. And I can then talk about what I've learned and kind of how you make that system work. So one of the schools I'm at, which I'm sitting in the office right now, we got about 450 kids in the north side of Vancouver, Washington, and a little bit more affluent. Definitely not an affluent school, but we pull from some of the wealthier parts of Vancouver, and then the others. So I spend every Monday, Tuesday at that school. I alternate my Wednesdays, and then Thursday, Friday is at completely other side. So the southeast part of Vancouver, at least in our district. There's 2 districts in the city, and about 650 kids, about 75% free and reduced lunch. Minority majority school, all of those things that you would expect in a Title I school, and a lot of those same challenges. And so we face very different, problems and issues. Now kids are still kids and they need our love and support. And as you mentioned, relationships rule the day. And that doesn't matter where you go, that's always the same. And so, going from when I switched from one school to the next, I really think about it kind of like compartmentalizing that. If I'm not at Eisenhower Elementary, which is where I am today, and then I move over to Ogden, like I can't be worrying about other school issues because I still have my essentially full-time job at the school I'm in. And so trying to balance those 2 things is, I think that's one of the keys to being able to do it. And I think it goes back to having those different roles that I've had, right? Or as a track coach in the state of Oregon, where we had 17 different events, right? You're not an expert in any of those or all of those events, but you work with people who are. And so I feel like, again, you can't be, if I'm working with the throwers, I can't be worried about how the pole vault coach is doing. I have to trust that they're getting their job done. So the same thing here is when I leave Eisenhower, I have to trust that the principal, the coaches, everyone who works in that building takes care of my job that I have to leave. And then I go worry about Ogden Elementary. So that's kind of like the start of it, right? And then I've done this now for 2 years in being in that split role. And I think one of the biggest things to make it work, I mentioned kind of personally compartmentalizing, being able to prioritize of what really matters and what's going to get the most amount done in your building, what's going to have that highest impact. And also communication. That communication piece is crucial, because when I leave a building, that principal and the team needs to know, is there anything that I have left undone that they're going to need to follow up on, right? And then I'll jump into the next school, and same thing. When I leave that school, what things are left undone that have to keep getting worked on, or same thing, or like what parents have I been talking to? Like, so we have good communication systems, especially like with our Google Suite of being able to see everything each other does. So, so just like if they need to pull my things when I'm gone, it's easily to access, and they can pull that up. So there's a lot of challenges to that. But to be honest, there's also a lot of benefits to being in a role like this, which you don't think about at first. And so one, I get to learn as an assistant principal, I get to learn from two very different school leaders. And so I can, as I'm thinking about, okay, I want to have my own building soon in the next year or two. Well, what are the awesome things that this one leader is doing? What do I want to pull and become really good at that they do? And then what about this other leader? What are some things that they do really well? And I can then start to see how different people can successfully lead buildings. And then same thing of just like the culture of a building. Like, how do you develop different cultures? Or I guess maybe how do different cultures develop? And if it's intentional or not, what's going on there? And then I'll be often sitting in a meeting at Eisenhower Elementary and say, hey, over at Ogden, here's what we're doing. Or when I'm at Ogden, hey, at Eisenhower, here's what we're doing, and it's working really well. It's like I'm doing constant site visits, and then can learn from them and then try to put some of those things in place that aren't in place at other schools. And so that piece of like sharing information, even though we're in the same district, the schools are, doesn't necessarily mean that the people meet and talk about what their practice is all the time. And so that piece that's been really cool to be a part of.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, obviously, I'm somebody who's in a lot of schools throughout the course of the year, and it's still just amazing to me to observe and learn from school leaders across the country. So it's got to be really interesting for you. I'm curious. You said a word that is one of my favorite words, and I think it's something that goes right at one of the most important things that leaders can do, which is be intentional. So because you have this split life, and because you have to compartmentalize one building versus the other, systems probably look a little bit different. And what are some things that you're doing intentionally between the two buildings so that you can continue to be effective, continue to be efficient, and then also still be seen as a leader in both buildings?
Yeah, I'd say there's really a few parts to that. And this is in no particular order. So I'd say one of the things that I do, and I stole this from my friend Will Parker from Principal Matters, is I've kind of stopped going with, when I see people and just say, instead of saying like, how are you doing? I've started asking like, how can I help, or what can I do for you? Just because I'm not always there. I don't always see people. And so I want to put myself into a position of service right away. How can I benefit that person? I'm only going to see them for, maybe that's my only interaction with them that week, because I don't see them every day. And so I try to be, as you said, intentional about being open about service. So how can I help you today? Or what can I do for you? And I think that starts because that works on that relationship piece, which is so important that people realize like that one of the leaders in my building cares about what's going on, and everything that's going on with right. Cause teachers are just in their classrooms, right? They got their 26, however many kids, and that's their world. And then we, as leaders, we see everything that's going on. And so ensuring that they are seen and heard, I think that's really important. So that's part of what I do. The other piece is I try to be, and I do a lot of reading on like time management systems and things like that, just to make sure I'm actually focusing on what matters. So Michael Hyatt's book, Free to Focus, I'm pretty sure I said the name right of the book, has been really beneficial to me, of just like how, getting things done and how you can prioritize and focus on different tasks. So that's been really helpful for me, is having like a clear systems approach to how I just manage my personal day. And so then I can focus on what I've decided is important. And then I think the other piece is being physically present in the building. So if people want to see me as a leader, they need to first see me and not just be hidden in my office all day. And so, when we wrap up this recording here, I'm going to go step into every single classroom in the building. I'll go in, talk to kids, say hi to the teacher. And I ensure that I find time for that every week at both schools. Now, obviously there are weeks that it doesn't happen, right? Things come up, you don't get to it, but more than not, I'm in every classroom every week. And so they know that I'm there. And when I'm in there, I'll talk with kids, or if there's a behavior issue, I can jump in and help the teacher if I have that relationship, and I know that they would appreciate the help in the moment, so they can focus on the other students. So those things, being physically seen, I think is really important, as to have that, being viewed as the leader. And then one of the challenges of the AP role, and maybe this is taking this in another direction than you were thinking, but is being kind of pigeonholed into, you just do safety, you just do discipline. And so ensuring that I have like intentional conversations with teachers about instruction or about other things that are going on in the building. So it's not the only thing that I do. So I'm not just the discipline guy, and that's the only reason that I'm going to go talk with a teacher or something like that.
I think that's huge right there. One of the struggles that I had, both as an assistant principal and then early as a principal, and that was in the same building, was the roles were so clearly defined in the system that we had that go-to for this particular thing had to be this person. And we didn't really cross-train. We didn't really, ensure that everybody had the same information. So you could ask any of the members of the team about something that might be going on. I was very intentional with that, maybe starting about a year and a half into my principalship, trying to really ensure that everybody on my leadership team had an opportunity to be an instructional leader, to ensure that everybody on my leadership team had a hand in student discipline, and that everybody had a hand in professional development and those types of things. I think that's really big that you're able to do that. You touched on something just really quick, and I want to go there for just a second, and then I want to loop in a different direction. But as somebody who was a secondary teacher moving down to an elementary level, and I get this question occasionally from folks in both directions, right? So I was an elementary teacher, and now I'm applying for an assistant principal job at a high school, or vice versa. Obviously, there are the crossovers from, specialized area, even though you had 3, to, grade level specifics. But it's the difference in students going from high school age kids, middle school age kids to elementary kids. What are some things you have learned about building relationships with elementary school kids that might be a little different than how you build relationships with kids who are in their teens?
Yeah, that was it was a learning curve last year when I moved from high school for the first time down to elementary. So there's a few things. One, I think I would have struggled a lot if I didn't have the similar age kids at home. So right now, just given that that's my life when I leave work, I've got, my oldest is a kindergartner. And so those interactions I'm already used to having at home. And so I can have them here at school. I think if I didn't have kids, or my kids were infants and just toddlers, it'd be very different. But like, you're a high school guy, and the interactions you have with those kids are very adult focused, right? Like, I mean, they're still kids. High schoolers are still kids, but you have really mature conversations. You can talk and joke and be sarcastic and get it. And right, there's all of these things that you can do with high schoolers that you can't with elementary kids. And so I have just tried to, especially with the littles, right? Those kindergartners, first graders. At one of the schools, we have preschool and transitional kindergartners. So they're real, right? We got 3-year-olds at the beginning of the year in our schools. Maybe they're just turned 4. Really little kids, right? And so just having that interaction that's focused on, well, if it's not a negative interaction, then it's probably play-based or something like that, right? Trying or getting down at their level and having those, trying to have real experiences with them. That piece it's still a learning curve, even though I have my own kids at home. Physically sitting down with them. So like, because if there's carpet time and they're doing some calendar math or something like that, at a high school, right, I might sit at a table with the kids working on a project and talk with them. I'm going to sit at the carpet, cross-legged, follow the directions of the teacher. I might just sit down right in the center of them and just follow along, right? Raise my hand when it's time and have those types of interactions. And so it's taken me some intentional reflection to figure out, okay, I need to be a little bit sillier as a person, right? And just like be willing to, I don't even know the right phrase, but essentially just be willing to be more like the kids and less serious and understand that there's a time for that. And there's also a time just to kids just want to have fun and realize that their principal, likes seeing them learn and is excited to be in school. And so, trying to bring that joy with me when I'm going into the classroom.
Yeah, you're taking me back. You're right. I was a high school guy almost my whole career. I started with middle school, but the bulk of my career was at the high school level. And then as a superintendent, just right away, first couple of days of school, the kindergarten teachers saying, hey, come down. We want to introduce you to the kids. And, the kids, we're, doing calendar. And so, we're going to sit on the mat. And I'm like, hey, I can do this. One of the kindergarten teachers offered me, a chair that's like this tall, those kindergarten chairs. Right. And I'm like, no, I'll sit on the floor. I could do this, and I sat down on the floor and kid looked right at me and he goes, we sit crisscross applesauce on the mat. I'm like, all right, here we go. I can do this. So definitely an adjustment, but that's okay. I absolutely loved my time in the land of the littles. It really, really made a difference. Let's shift gears just a little bit here, Nick. So I know I have a lot of listeners for the show that are aspiring leaders. I mean, certainly a lot of listeners who are already, in their career, either early or well established in their careers, but certainly some who are aspiring leaders who are interested in taking that leap into an assistant principalship or maybe directly into a principalship. What might be some advice? I mean, you're a couple of years into your journey that you would give somebody who's looking to take that leap into school leadership in terms of how to find the right gig, how to prepare for the interview, some of those types of things. Throw a couple of gems their way.
When it comes to the interview, if we start there, I'd say there's a few things. One is practice, like actually spend time going over what you think answers or questions might be, speaking them out loud with a partner, with somebody is going to be really important. I do that when I interview for jobs, and it's at least to me, horribly awkward and uncomfortable. And it's 100% worth it. Now there are, I don't have the exact resources off the top of my head, but recently Jimmy Casas had an interview chair episode about 15 minutes long about interviewing for school leadership positions. And it really would work for teacher positions as well. Phenomenal short listen. And then Principal Kafele, everyone's guru, has an AP video or 2 AP videos on interviewing for principal jobs. And those are phenomenal. I think they're from about 5 or 6 years ago, but they're still relevant in terms of the types of questions you should expect to be asked and how you should present yourself and that kind of stuff. So those 2, I think, are awesome resources, along with then just spending time to reflect on your practices and prepare and that kind of stuff. Probably the best interview advice I ever got was think about your answers as like a pyramid or a triangle, where you got your philosophy at the bottom, you have your current roles and responsibilities that might match that in the middle, and then a specific example, or really a story about like tying it all together and how you've put that into practice. And so I've always thought that was pretty good advice. And that was a superintendent I've got a ton of respect for who gave that to me. That's what she looks for in people's answers. So that's an interview piece. In terms of like some advice for aspiring leaders, or that kind of stuff, I think it's looking for find opportunities that can demonstrate your leadership ability, so you're ready for that next role. And if you're at the secondary or level at middle or high school, if you're into athletics, getting into a head coaching job can be a really nice position. And if you're at a large enough school where they have department heads, that's another really good position. If you're at the elementary level, just finding those, talk with your administrators. What are some leadership opportunities you might be able to step up into? Or it even could be your district office. Sometimes they're looking for teacher volunteers to be on committees to help out with things. I know our district is always looking for teacher volunteers to be on different staff committees as they look at curriculum, as they look at strategic plan practices. Those are just another area, right? So I think that's one, is finding those opportunities. Building relationships. I mean, networking is always going to be really important. It's not the end all be all, because if you can interview well and you've got a great resume, you should be good. But building relationships is always going to be important. And building like an honest relationship with people who maybe it's just your assistant principal in your building, or someone who's into school leadership, but building a real authentic relationship with someone in that position could be a good thing to do next. And you mentioned about finding the right fit. I think my favorite activity I've ever done, and I've talked a lot about this in different venues, is aligning your goals, values, and passions. And we don't need to go into that here because it would take a while, but just this idea of, if you wrote down your goals and you wrote down your core values and what you're passionate about, like, could you draw a straight line across from them, or like, could you connect them, or are they totally disjointed? Because if they're connected in some way, you're going to feel pretty successful in what you're doing, and probably pretty, like you having fulfilled, I should say. And so if you're thinking about a position and you feel like it would fit into those categories, that's probably then something you're going to really, really want to do. I got two more thoughts. Can keep mastering your craft, or continuing to focus on like learning, never stop learning, right? School leadership is a never ending journey. So you always want to continue learning, trying to get better, and looking for just new PD. If it's a podcast, if it's a book, if it's a conference you can go to, continue to push yourself, because our journey never stops. And then lastly, execute, do something. Like go find, if you're not sure, if you feel like you have all the qualifications, even if you don't quite hit every qualification, take action, try applying for it. What's the worst that could happen is they could say no, but then you have your resume is going to be up to date. You have a good cover letter. You have letters of recommendation. You'll be ready to go in case something else does pop up. That was a lot.
No, that's all right. I like that. You hit on a whole lot of different pieces there. The one that I want to emphasize, and then I'll move us to our final question on the show. Giving yourself the opportunity to find leadership chances. So, and you talked about at the district level, they're often looking for people to be on committees. And that one hit me in a couple of different directions. First and foremost, one piece of advice, I'll throw in some bonus advice here, that I give people all the time. When you're interviewing for a position, especially if it's one that's in your own school, don't assume everybody knows everything about you. You have to be intentional about really sharing who you are. That goes right at the volunteer within your district, because it's not always just about the building you're in. It's about learning about other buildings. It's about getting your name out there so people know who you are. And so that not only other, district level employees who might be making decisions, but also other teachers from other buildings get to know a little bit more about you, because you never know when you land in the hot seat, who's going to be sitting in the chairs looking back at you. So the more you can build those relationships, and the more that you can find opportunities to take on some leadership responsibilities, it's an opportunity to have that top of the pyramid, like you shared, that here's an example of leadership that I have been able to take on as a result of volunteering for whatever committee or whatever the case may be. Love that, love that, love that. I think that's super, super valuable information. Okay, we are at that point, Nick, where I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody here on the podcast. This is the Leaning into Leadership podcast. So, Nick, how are you leaning into leadership right now?
Right now, I am really focused. I want to be an amazing assistant principal or principal when I get that opportunity, and I want to be an amazing husband and father. And that mesh of those two roles is that's where I'm at right now. I already mentioned I've got 3 little kids and a wife that I've been together with for a long time, and being successful in both is really important to me. And so how I'm leaning into leadership is trying to learn from as many people as possible of how have they done that, or if they're willing to be a little vulnerable with me, how have they maybe not successfully done that, but what would they do differently if they were to have done it again? And then share what I've learned. And so that's kind of what I'll be this summer. I'm fortunate to be speaking at some national conferences on this idea of being a time-starved school leader. And I've been interviewing people from across the country. You were one of them. And just trying to learn from their experiences of how can you be a great school leader and a great, whatever it is. For me, it's a husband and father, but for somebody else, it's something completely different. And that part doesn't matter, but it's that there's at least 2 pieces to all of us, right? Like we can't always be, the principal of the school, Dr. Pepper, Dr. Davies. We can't always just be on because eventually, even if we can do that for a year or 2 or 5, eventually that's going to become draining. And that's not going to be a fulfilling and really a sustainable practice, right? And so with these interviews I've done, I've been trying to put them into practice in myself. And what happened over the past couple of years is, as I put in these practices I've learned, which I'll really briefly touch on in a second, I got the cool recognition from the state and from NAESP because they work. Like this stuff really works. And so I think one of the keys that I've learned from a lot of school leaders is you got to focus on the right return on your time. So how are you getting everything done in your day? So by prioritizing, controlling what you can, and empowering others, those 3 areas have been really impactful for so many different people that I've interviewed. And for school leaders, how do you decide what you're supposed to prioritize? I've been just using like the Wallace Foundation research came out in 2021 about 4 areas that they think principals should focus on: intentionally focused interactions, instructionally focused interactions with teachers, productive school climate, facilitating collaboration among the PLCs in your school, and managing personnel and resources strategically. So like if that's your focus, research says that those are the biggest high impact areas for a principal. So that's one piece. They're getting the best return on your time. Somebody might call it something different. That's what I've been calling it. And then the other piece is, taking care of that balance piece. Maybe balance is not the right word. I haven't come up with a better one yet. But that idea of balance in your life are you in alignment with your values, goals, passions? I mentioned that earlier. I'm bringing it up more than once just because it was so powerful for me the first time I ever did an activity like that. Are you present in what you're doing? So if you're working, are you at work, right? Or are you kind of working and then you're texting home or you're scrolling through social media? Like when you're at work, get after it and be at work. And when you're at home, be at home and don't also be at work, right? Whatever you're doing should get your full attention. So then it's going to give you a lot more time in your day to do the other things that you want to do. So be present in everything you're doing. And then the last piece is take care of your body. And that means different things to different people, but you have to, do some sort of exercise. You have to get sleep and you have to eat something nutritious every day in order to ensure that your body can handle the stressors, because our jobs are hard for sure. It handles the stressors of everyday life and keep going tomorrow and the next day and the day after and just be ready to go. So that's how I'm leaning into leadership, is diving into that area, trying to spread that word and be a model for that. And I couldn't be farther from perfect, but I'm trying to get a little better every day.
That's outstanding. I love that. That's a great, great answer. So, Nick, people are going to want to get in touch with you. They're going to want to follow you on social media. What's the best way for them to get connected with you?
2 ways. You can find me on LinkedIn, Nick Davies, Ph.D. That's my only social media account right now. I don't know if I'd have time to manage more than one. And then the other piece is my website, www.drnickdavies.com. Find ways to get a hold of me, things that I'm offering to connect with, or if you just want to chat. I did that just last week. Someone reached out and said, "Hey, can we just meet, talk about stuff?" Great. So we did that. Happy to do whatever can be helpful.
Outstanding stuff. Right on. Thank you so much, Dr. Nick Davies, for joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast.
Thank you.
All right. Outstanding stuff there from Dr. Nick Davies. I really appreciate him coming on the show. Fantastic conversation, folks. Make sure you get down there in the show notes. Click on the links there so you can get connected with Dr. Davies. And now it's time for a pep talk. So earlier this week, I was listening to a podcast, and the guest on the show shared a thought about the difference between good and great leaders. And I thought it was just so profound. I just want to dig into it a little bit further. What the individual had talked about was how good leaders get everybody to believe in them, to believe in the leader, to believe in the work that that leader wants, to get them to really see the focus. But that the truly great leader gets others to not only believe in the leader, but to believe in themselves and to believe into and own that collective mission and vision. I think this is such a big piece, folks. You know, as leaders, we hear all the time, you can't be a leader if you don't have followers. And that's so very true. So you do need to have people believe in you as the leader. But man, when you really make the leap from good to great, that is when it's about helping others to take ownership of themselves and to believe in themselves and to know that they can go beyond where they actually thought they could go. When they do that, that's when they really take ownership of that collective mission, that collective vision. That's how you really move an organization forward. Great leaders allow others to not only believe in the leader, but to believe in themselves and to take ownership of that mission. So as you're taking some time this summer, maybe you're recharging the battery a little bit, you're thinking about the upcoming year, think about that particular piece. Think about how, as a leader, you can do more to ensure that those in your charge believe in themselves, take ownership of the mission and the vision, and have the opportunity to truly soar. That's what it's all about, folks. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode of Leaning into Leadership. Get out there, have a road to awesome day.